Welcome to the retention calculation overview video. Now, retention calculation has changed for me in recent years and months because the way that the industry does business has changed so dramatically. So we have some options. If you are a stylist who specializes in services where the time between visits is extended, meaning my balayage stylists and those who do services that are low maintenance, where you maybe only see a guest twice a year, there's a new calculation for you. So tune in. Even if you've done retention with me before, I think it's going to blow your mind. Your retention percentage is the most important number in your business. It's more important than referrals. It's more important than how many Instagram posts you make a month. It's more important than how much money you make, because if we're not retaining, you will lose money next year, no matter what you do. If you can't retain, you do what I call bleeding out. And no matter how many infusions of vitamins and essential nutrients we give your business, you will bleed them out if your retention has a hole in it. So until we can get your retention right and tight, I actually don't coach you to any marketing at all. I want you to improve your guest experience so that the retention is solid, and then we can focus on marketing because we know your efforts will produce long-term results. I want to show you why retention is so important. If your client sends you 10 new referrals this month, but your new guest retention percentage is just 14%, 8 or 9 of those new guests you meet will never come back. So imagine if you met 10 new guests a month and only 1 stuck with you. Doesn't that just sound exhausting? This is the result of poor retention. Here's another example. If your client sends you 10 new referrals this month and your new guest retention percentage is 30%, which is industry average, so 30% is actually quite good, 7 of those new referrals won't come back. This is important for you to know. This is what the average stylist does. Meets 10 people, 3 stick around, 7 never come back again. You have to know these numbers. This is what we're working with. If your clients send you 10 new referrals this month and your new guest retention is 50%, you'll keep 5 and you'll lose 5. That's actually really good odds. So the higher we can get your retention, the faster your business will build. And this is a really good example of that. So all of those factors were related to new guest retention. We always weigh that against base clientele retention. So your base clientele is your client Jessica, who's seen you for 3 years. You know her really well. She comes in several times a year. She's part of your base, right? You've already retained her. Right? So anybody that we've already retained, meaning they've been a part of our business for 3 visits or more, can be counted as our base clientele. And we need to look at both, retaining the new guests and then retaining that base. So if you retain 50% of your new guests, so the new people that you meet in any given year, but your existing clientele retention is just 80%, you would need to see 10 to 12 new guests a month just to sustain your income. Meaning you'd meet 120 to 140 new guests a year and your income would stay exactly the same. Isn't that wild to think about? And that is the result of poor base clientele retention. So I coach a lot of stylists who are like, I don't understand. I'm meeting a lot of new people, but my income isn't really changing year over year. This is why. Retention is the lifeblood of your business, and we've got to get it right. So let's first look at the new guest retention. So first, the calculation is going to be if a guest comes in to see you 4 times or more each year, okay? So for some of you, the bulk of your clientele only comes in twice a year. We're going to do your math a little bit differently. But for the average stylist, the cut color stylist, an extension stylist, somebody like that, this is what we're going to go with. And if you're like, you know what? I do a little bit of both. I do some balayage, I do some cut and color, I do some extensions. You might want to run 2 sets of calculations. Your balayage clientele retention and the rest of your clientele retention. Maybe. It depends on how accurate you want to be with these calculations. So if you have a standard clientele, your guests come in to see you every 6 to 10 weeks, this is what you're going to go with. Step 1, I want you to look at the new guest visits between December 1st of 2019 and February 28th of 2020. So end of 2019 to the beginning of 2020, the new guests, just the new people you met in that time range. And new guests mean walk-ins, referrals, salon clients, everything, okay? New guests you met in this range, December 1st, 2019 and February 28th, 2020. Step 2, make a list of all of those new guests. So write their names down in that period that I just defined. Go ahead and write all of their names down on a piece of paper. Step 3, go through your books and search for those names you wrote down. Highlight the names of guests that have come back at least 3 times since that initial first visit. And some of you are going to be like, well, Susie didn't come back, but maybe it's because of the pandemic. If Susie hasn't come back in a year, she's going somewhere else or doing her hair at home. We can't count her as part of your base. She has not returned. So if we're going to be realistic, we have to do it based on facts, not on feelings. So this is the calculation we're going to go with. Then we take the result of step number 3 divided by the result of step number 2, and that is our new guest retention. So let me show you that in practice. So you'll look at that range I defined for you, December 1st of 2019 to February 28th of 2020. Let's pretend that you saw 16 new guests in that 3-month period, okay? In December, January, and February, these are all of the new people you met in that time frame, okay? So you write down all of their names. Then you're going to go back through your books, search for those names, these names that you just wrote down, search for them and highlight the names of the guests that have seen you at least 3 times. So that first time they came in to see you, that's visit number 1. They'll need to have come back for a second visit and a third visit, okay? So let's say that Sarah, Marissa, Brianna, Shay, and Ariana all came back at least 2 more times since that first visit. That first visit is visit number 1. And then let's say visit number 2 was in June and visit number 3 was in September. Awesome. So these 5 guests were retained. Everybody else we cannot count as retained. We don't know what they're going to do. They haven't come back to see us 3 times within a year. So that's not going to work for us. So we take those 5 retained guests, the names that we highlighted right here, 5 retained, divided by 16 total, right? There were 16 total on our list from step number 2. 5 divided by 16 is 0.31. That is 31%. So that means your new guest retention is 31%, which is actually industry standard. So that's great. It's crazy when you look at it that way, right? But that is industry standard. So the calculation changes a bit if your average guest comes in 3 times or less each year. So this is mostly those who do extensive blonding services, color corrections. If your appointments take 3 to 4 hours each time, like you're only seeing 2, maybe 3 clients a day, this might be for you. And if you're only seeing 2 or 3 clients a day, but you have huge gaps on your books, that I'm not talking to you. If you're seeing 2 or 3 guests a day and you have big fat gaps on your books, you're going to do this initial calculation, the one I talked about a few minutes ago. But if you are stacked with balayage clients, blonding services, massive color corrections, that's how you spend most of your day. This is your calculation. So we look at a different time period. You're going to look at your new guests between July of 2019, yes, a year and a half ago, and September 30th, 2019. Whoa, we're really going back in time. Yes, we are. This is how you do a modified guest retention if you serve mainly a blonding or a high demand clientele that doesn't come in as frequently. Then, same thing, you make a list of all the new guests who saw you within that time period. Same thing, you highlight the names of those who have seen you 3 times total, and then the math is the same as well. So the thing that changes is that initial time period, okay? So the math ends up being the same. The time period you're looking at is different. We give more time for those guests to have returned for those second and third visits because they don't come in as frequently. So we just need to shift back the timeline in order to account for that. So now let's take a look at how we calculate base clientele retention. So the math that I just gave you leading up to this point was calculating new guest retention. Now we're going to look at your base. So what I want you to do is look at the names of all the guests you saw between November 1st, 2019 and January 31st, 2020. Write down just the names of the guests who were returning clients. This essentially means you write down a guest's name on your list as long as they weren't brand new. So if somebody's first visit was November 15th, they won't make the list, right? If somebody's very first time coming in was sometime between November and end of January last year, they won't make the list, but everybody else makes this list, okay? Anybody who saw you between November 1st, 2019 and January 31st, 2020. Count up how many names are on that list. So just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. Use a highlighter and highlight the names of guests that you saw between September 1st, 2020 and today. So if you've calculated base clientele with me before, this is a really simplified way of doing it. You're welcome. We've made it much easier. So you make that initial list in step 1, count how many names are on that list. Then for step 3, you use a highlighter and highlight the names of guests from that list that you saw between September 1st of 2020 to today. Okay, just highlight them. Okay, yep, Mackenzie made the first list and then she came back to see me October 17th. Awesome, highlight her name. If they saw you in the range on step 1 and then saw you again in the range on step 3, they get highlighted. Step 4 is going to be that you count all the names you just highlighted. And then step 5, you're going to do the math. Result of step number 4 divided by result of step number 2 equals your retained base. So for example, let's pretend you made the list in step number 1 and then you did the count. Okay, so step number 2, I saw 308 clients between November 1st, 2019 and January 31st, 2020. Great. So then step number 3, you went through and you did the highlighting, right? Then you calculate how many names you highlighted. So you calculate those highlighted names, and let's say you had 238 highlighted names. So then we take 238 divided by 308, and that means your base is 77% retained. That's scary. That's very low retention, but that's also pandemic retention. Some of us faced that this year in 2020, so it's important to know those numbers. Retention is the #1 indicator of business health. So much love, happy business building, and I'll see you on the next one.